Hey y'all, Gun here. I'm coming to talk to you guys about the drafts coming tomorrow. Now that Gencon's it's here. We'll finally see all the cards. We'll be able to have everything released. But with that, I wanted to go over some basic draft strategies. Most of this for the more experienced player is they probably already understand and know. But this is more for the player who knows the game, but they don't really have like draft in mind, and they want to, dive in. So let's go ahead and get started. So to start off, the booster packs for Into the Accordlands are going to have 15 cards in the pack, 10 of which being commons, 10 or 3 being uncommons, one rare or legendary, and then one foil or extended art. From what we've seen, the extended arts are mostly rares and legendaries with a couple uncommons built in. Um, which means that you're very likely to get a second rare or second legendary in a pack, although it's not guaranteed. So you could get an extra common that's foil, or one of the uncommon extended arts is possible in the packs. So it's something to be aware of. But when you open your packs, for the most part, especially with this being a pre-release, you're going to be looking at that rare or legendary and pulling that or pulling the extended art that's there. Especially because you only get 3 packs. With a group of 8, you're going to be splitting those 24 packs in the box with 3 each. So most likely taking the rare won't even hurt your strategy that much, especially the first pack, because you don't even know which way you're going. And in later packs, maybe you'll have more discretion, especially if the rares end up being rare and legendaries end up being warlords, and you already have a warlord, right? But I think the main thing to note here is that you're going to have 5. Most likely you're going to be sticking to those 5 uncommon plus cards for your first picks, and then the commons will kind of fill out the base. So when it comes to the actual strategy, there's a few things to look into. So if you were to fail to find a warlord, there's actually 7 draft warlords that are printed effectively just for the draft. All of these warlords are, in general, underpowered with a limited order, or in the case of Nisha, have 2 classes. In general, I would recommend avoiding these ones. Their limited orders are underpowered, but they will give you access to whatever you want. So if you don't find a good warlord, it's better to stick with this than go with a warlord you don't have synergy with. So just be aware of that and balance accordingly. As always, you're going to have to pick between one of the factions, and you're going to have to read the cards that you're getting to see what's actually getting passed to you, to make sure that, okay, I'm seeing a lot of devs, so I'm going to keep taking devs, or I haven't seen a single Free Kingdoms character. These are probably being hoarded by the 2 behind me. Maybe I should pivot from Freaks to Nothrog or whatever. You'll be able to tell based on what cards you get. Obviously, that's a little more high end, but it's don't be afraid to pivot and don't lock yourself in too early. Though I do recommend picking up one of the better warlords when you get the chance, and I'll kind of go over what those look like in a little bit. Going on to the other part of it, the most important thing to me for these is going to be your starting army, because these are 30 card decks you're going to be playing with. 6 of your characters, so over a third of your characters, start in play. So what that means is your starting army is more important than usual, and you're going to draw less characters in your hand. So that means that both your warlord is more important, what they're able to do, and what characters you have in your starting army are a much bigger part of your game plan than even in normal constructed, which they already are. If you don't get the starting army, or if you're missing cards to make the 50-50 split, these are the cards that you'll be able to get. You have the Sarakian Self-Sword, who is just a level 1 with basic stats, 12 AC and 0 skill, 0 attack. It's not bad, but it's not good, obviously. It has no ability, it has no upside, it's just a character, right? Then there are 2 level 2 options, but they are unique, so you can't choose to get both, 2 of the same. There's Myzerian Scout, which is the one that I would argue you should go for, but it's got 0 attack, 2 skill, and 12 AC, 1 hit point. It's unique. As mentioned, you can only have one. Um, but it has spend order, perform plus 0 range strike. What that does is it gives you an extra range strike or an extra strike on your opening turn, versus the freelancer, or freelance cavalier, who is 2 attack, 13 AC, 2 skill, and 1 hit point, which they have the same skill and hit points. You have slightly better attack and AC on the cavalier, but it's not enough to make up for it. So one of the things I recommend is get a single level 2 for your faction as soon as possible. Make sure it's good. Obviously, the level 1s and 2s are going to be common, so they're not something you're going to pull out with those first 5 picks. But those first 5 picks, you should be picking your best cards and the ones that you think will synergize with the Warlord you're aiming for, or the Warlords you pull, right? Especially because, you're only going to see so many of them versus commons and uncommons you're going to see a ton of. But yeah, so to give you kind of an example of this, I kind of wanted to pull up the list of devs. So these are the Deveranians that are currently in the set. The main one is going to be, or main thing to look at are what commons, uncommons, rares, and legendaries there are. Now, we haven't seen 9 of the cards, all of which are going to be, would have been on this sheet if we had them. Most of which are the uncommons, I think. I believe there's 4 more commons, 4 more uncommons, and then 1 more rare that we're missing. It's possible those numbers are a little mixed, but that withstanding, what you're going to want to look for is, the distributions that you can expect to see. For example, since these are rares, you're most likely not, the Gedbane, Kingslayer, and Duke Richter, you should not count on pulling. If you do see them and you already have a Dev Warlord, fantastic, take them. Otherwise, Gedbane and Kingslayer, for example, they, you might take them just to be a big stunned character, or just take them because they're rare, right? When it comes to the uncommons, you have things like Sister Kieran, and you're going to also have mercenaries that you're going to want to look through and make sure that you take the best one for your deck. The big thing to remember is that there's, only going to be 3 uncommons in your pack, and you're sharing factions with everybody at the table. So there's six factions, but everyone can use mercenaries, so really there's only 5. And, mercenaries might be able to get away with something, but for the most part, your characters are getting taken. And the mercenaries that we have will have a weakness. So you really got to pay attention to, what those cards are and how they're getting passed to you. And if you see, your starting army with your Ambitious Squire or your Gencon Initiate in your opening pack, even though you need those spots and you want to fill those slots so you get the better starters, you could probably afford to pass them because the uncommons and rares are going to be more important and more valuable for your deck. And you should really be making those comparisons as you go. Unfortunately, we don't have more uncommons to really make the comparisons with, and I'm not going to put every faction up here to go through. But it's really just about, checking what you need and what's important, and understanding that for level 1s and 2s, you really care most about the starting army and then how good they are when they drop in play. So to take these as an example, Gencon Initiate is a really good starter, but as a card you drop in play, it's not great. Whereas Squire Parthas is actually kind of the opposite. He's not a very good starter, but he's very good when he's dropped in play. Or at least he's useful when he's dropped in play. Versus you have something that's a little more balanced, like an Ambitious Squire, which can be used for both. So say if you already have, 2 starters and you pull a pack that has both Ambitious Squire and Gencon Initiate, you might opt for Ambitious Squire over Gencon Initiate strictly from the fact that it can work as both, and if the pack gets back to you again, you might be able to pull the Initiate too, though that's not necessarily likely. So it's just something to be aware of. Obviously, with any drafting game, you're kind of playing the field as well as playing with the hands you're given. So just be aware of that, and note that your characters really are the most important thing to draft. Everything else is fluff by comparison, even though most of the cards you're going to be drawing are not going to be characters. Um, so, kind of lastly, I wanted to kind of go over the warlords themselves, and I kind of made a little tier list here. And I could probably stretch this a bit. Let's do that. So, when you look at these, I didn't really rate these by how strong they necessarily would be or what their high ends are. It's kind of where they stand from a general drafting standpoint. Um, I'd say I'm pretty confident in most of these. The the main thing is that the top row is going to be ones that I think will thrive in the format in general because they don't require, the warlord can very much do the work himself, or the warlord's support ability is generic enough where they're able um, to just work with whatever you're given, right? So you take Alrin Gaunt, for example. Even though he's a merc, he's one of the few mercs that can come up to the front by himself and do some work and just make things happen, because mercs especially are going to have, like I said, the issue where everyone's going to be taking mercenaries because they can play them in their decks regardless of the faction, versus every other faction is going to suffer, right? But if you were to look at um, Adathan, for example, all he needs is level ones to use his ability, be active, and do some damage. Obviously, all the fighters in general, and typically all the rogues, get a little bit of a boost in draft just because you get so few characters that they just get to step up, and they don't require as many support cards, which is kind of why the next two tiers started up. Which is, I still think they're strong. The second tiers, I think they're strong, but they need more support with them. For example, Lord Barrow compared to Tyson, Lord Barrow only gets the strikes if you get the spells, which means you have to pull enough spells to make it worthwhile. And the strikes are a little bit smaller in general, so if you fall behind for whatever reason, he's got less bulk, he's got less base strikes, versus Tyson just needs to use her order. She gets two plus fours and does, regardless of what cards are in her hand, right? Um, and a lot of the warlords that are in the strong but need support category are just good warlords. They don't necessarily work as well on their own. I Retsov was kind of an exception, I was thinking, but at the same time he's a mercenary, which is why he dropped below. Same thing with that Anakana. And then finally you have, well, not finally, but you have your support. Support is likely too costly to be worth it. Um, I'd consider putting Grand Inventor Otto a little higher, but I just found that his order, while good, doesn't really carry as much weight as it could, and when he's by himself, he's going to be struggling. The rest of them kind of are too specific, or in Librarian Shasta's case, I think not. I'd almost rather have Archivist which is the generic draft warlord, than Librarian, just because Archivist kind of opens up what cards you can use, versus Librarian, while it gives you a discard route, which is good, I don't think she can handle the field on her own. And High Acolyte Helene runs into the issue where most of the level 4 Deveranians you're going to see are not going to be great, and then so you're really just relying on the second ability, which is good, but you're putting so much work into that where you could go with one of the other characters, or even clerics would work better. It's not that it won't work, it's just I think there's more necessary to make her work. Same thing goes with Gorthos. I think you're too reliant on getting those barbarians to put into play, which I don't know if you're going to be able to do. And then finally, the last tier is Zadok, and he's there because his whole deal is to have Sutex and synergize with them. But all the Sutex are going to be mercenaries, which I've mentioned before. Everyone's going to be pulling those from the stack, versus you're just hoping that you get enough to get a starting army, to get some that you can drop and play. And when he's by himself, his order's good, and being multi-class is very good in a draft format, but it's just his stats in general are a little weak, and I feel like he falls behind where none of the other ones feel as restricted. And that's just kind of how Zadok is designed. He's a synergy warlord. The the better Sutek there are and the more Sutek you can get, the better it'll be. But if you pull Zadok in or Zadok's in your first pack, I don't know if I would take him. Right now, obviously, if you get a good enough set later on, you could take him. But it's just there's so much risk in a draft format to go with that. So on that note, let me know what you guys think. You think I completely bungled this? You think my tier list is terrible? Probably is. I mean, I'm not gonna sit here and stand by it when Zadok wins the tournament on his own. But I do think I think it's pretty close. If I miss anything or if you have any input, just let me know. Thanks, everybody. Have a great one. See you at Gen Con.